Hi, my name is Fred Trotter, and I'm a healthcare data journalist, and we are recording some videos for release at the 2024 Healthcare Data Palooza. And I am here with Remy. Remy, could you introduce yourself and say what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Fred. My name is Remy DeCausemaker. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the open source lead here at the Digital Service at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I've been in this role for about 2 years now, and we work and partner with lots of different programs like the United States Digital Response, the U.S. Digital Core, the U.S. Digital Service, Coding It Forward, uh, Code in the Schools, lots of different early career talent programs to help bring that next generation of civic technologists and civic hackers into public service. And we do it in the open, and we work openly wherever we can.
And Remy, you have a long history of working in open source. Could you talk a little bit about what you did before?
Sure. Since joining the government, I've had the privilege and honor of helping us to organize and start the first open source program office, or OSPO, at a federal agency in the United States, with lots of support and help from the digital service at CMS and the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency and 18F and USDS and GSA and lots of other folks who've been doing this type of open source work in the open. The Department of Defense, probably the very first folks to really do this type of work. But open source program offices are a unique approach to doing open source strategy and community and program organizing. And that's sort of been my specialty in my career. I helped to run and organize open source program offices at places like Twitter, formerly known as Spotify, Red Hat, the Rochester Institute of Technology. I've been very lucky to be a part of multiple OSPOs throughout my career in a variety of roles.
Cool. So, in the background, people can't see her, is Alma, my sister, who works with me at CareSet. Alma, the Remy just sent a huge list of acronyms, and all of those acronyms, USDS, 18F, all these things, are centers of innovation in the government that are trying to bridge the delta between the technology pace and government. We should probably have links to all those in the show notes, so that's a good place to have some links to flesh that out. Yes, Twitter was definitely an open source powerhouse during your era there, so that's an amazing experience. We were just talking with Andrea, also from CMS Digital Services, and on that recording, Remy, you started to talk about um, uh, the implication of open AI models. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, in general, what kind of healthcare data sets are you interested in or excited about? Um, is that your answer? Is open weighted models that are going to be leveraged differently inside the government and other places? Is that one of the things that you care about, or say more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm from the old school, right? In the free software definition, when we talk about what makes something free software, it's not just the code that is released; it's also the code that you use to build the build scripts for it and the data that goes into it, and that reproducibility is and transparency is one of the key values of free and open source software that makes this sharing so powerful and makes it so universally useful and utilitarian for the rest of the community. Um, a half open thing is only half useful. So when I think about AI, I'm not just interested in whether or not you're leveraging the new libraries or not, but whether or not other people can take and build upon the work that you have been doing. And a lot of times that does mean having access to the training data, having access to the model weights, having access to the build scripts, having provenance for your code stack. All of those things really make it so that we can actually reproduce the science, because we know that if we look back, we're facing a reproducibility crisis in a lot of the historical academic writing and experiments and journalism that's been done in academia. And I think we're coming to a reckoning with that. And I can excuse it in the olden days when everything was in paper files and it was very difficult to share information. But these days, you can have a digital twin or a reflection of whatever data you're working with as just a nice byproduct. And you can log everything and you can keep track of everything. So for me, it's very important that all of that metadata and training data and model data comes along with the frameworks and the services so that it can be maximally reproducible.
It's fascinating. Remy, I also come from the kind of golden era of free Libre open source software. I had a saying back then that what we mean when we say free software is free as in beer, but we also mean free as in free speech, free as in liberty. And then one of the things that I learned very, very quickly, and I think this is relevant, is and this was a classic joke at the time, but I think it's becoming more and more relevant. It's also kind of free like a puppy. Like
Yep.
you get this liberty, right? You have this situation, but boy, you're going to have to do a lot of work to there's an obligation that comes along with it, which may be very financially expensive, right? So just because something didn't cost anything, is free like beer, doesn't mean it's not also a little bit free like a puppy, where you create a bunch of obligations. Um, could you kind of explain what you hear when you hear the free as in beer, free as in speech, free as in puppy? Like, what is that like for your daily work?
Yeah. So in the context of the question we just asked, like free as in puppy means like you get a puppy dropped off on your doorstep. It has no papers. You don't know how old it is. You don't know if it's had its shots. You don't know where it came from. You don't know what breed it is, right? And all of that information could have come from the previous owner. And when you have the medical history of the puppy and what the puppy's diet is like and what procedures have already been done and like how the puppy's been cared for and notes about its demeanor, all of those things make it easier to care for that animal properly and support it. uh, you're just dumping off piles of puppies. Like we're doing puppy mills for software. We're just cranking out as many puppies as we can and selling to as many people as we can. And that kind of sprawl makes it harder for people to care for and take care of all of this growing community of, strays that are out there. We can't just say, well, if I have a problem with this puppy, I'm just going to get a new one, right? You're going to have more and more sprawl and more surface area to deal with. And that's why, you know, we need to be more thoughtful and we need to be more deliberate about how we are categorizing these pieces of software and how we are keeping track of the work and the provenance of the work, because it's not just, hey, I got some work done. Like in math class, having the right answer wasn't the most important thing. It was, can you show your work on how you got there? And there are lots of different ways to get to the answer. And sometimes different ways of approaching those problems work for different kinds of contexts. So it isn't just for transparency's sake, right? It's not just to say like, here's this like empty platitude or here's this altruistic way of looking at it. It's like when you go to the thrift store and you buy a printer and it doesn't come with like the manual for it, or you don't know what oil goes in the car when you buy it, right? Like these are fundamental things for the sustainable maintenance of these systems. And it's great to get them, but that information is critical for people to operate them and maintain them. So we can be more responsible. It's up to everyone to be more responsible about it. And if we all do our part a little bit, we can make the whole world of software a lot easier and, make sure that these puppies are a lot easier to take care of.
So Remy, we've talked before. We know each other. I think we're friends. We've had, I think we've had a beer together. We had a muffin together, which I think is more, connecting.
Breaking
And
bread.
uh, and I'm familiar with your work. And I think your era at CMS will be remembered for a huge leap in the maturity of the approach to open source. One of the things that I think is a good segue from what you were just discussing about the kind of obligations of puppy, which, by the way, that's one of the best discussions of those issues that I think I've ever heard, is your work on vulnerability disclosure, which is, I think, also super important for the maturity of an open source program. Can you say more about what's happening now and what you've been working on and where you see it going in the future?
Sure. So just over the summer, we announced right after DEF CON this year that CMS is partnering with CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, to join their vulnerability disclosure program. They are helping us as key partners, and we work together with a specific vendor to develop a program where folks can responsibly disclose any bugs that they find in various parts of CMS's open source and just websites and other parts of our software ecosystem. So that site is live, bugcrowd.com/CMS-VDP. And anybody can go on there if they find issues. We recently included that information and updated our CMS website where people can find that information, as well as inside of our repositories, we have templates that we suggest and recommend that our open source projects use. So that information is contained in all of our default templates so that any open source projects we are releasing going forward has that same link. And it's a really important way for, if we're going to share this code, then making sure that there's a responsible way for people to let us know when there's a problem with it is actually a really important part of having a proactive cybersecurity strategy. I'm sure none of the people in the audience at Health Data Palooza are unaware that there have been a variety of high-profile ransomware and other kinds of attacks, specifically in the healthcare community this year. And, our agency and all government agencies are really trying to take a different approach and figure out ways that we can not only react more responsively to those things, but ways that we can prevent them and be proactive so that we can catch these kinds of things before they spin out. And because open source is so common, it makes total sense that we would be trying to secure more and more of the supply chain.
So I served on the Cybersecurity and Trust Healthcare Working Group, and we did a report to Congress on cybersecurity and healthcare. So I'm super familiar and interested in this subject. But it's funny because when I'm talking to a cybersecurity person, I once did a talk at DEF CON. And from their perspective, the fact that I did a talk at DEF CON is way more important than anything I ever said Congress, right? Because it's just, let's be real about what's important. And I think we will add a link to DEF CON and also CISA in our show notes, because I think there's one of the things you're discussing here is there's just a whole culture of cybersecurity that is missing, I think, from the discussion, and you're bridging those gaps. And my compliments. We have a little time left. I want to ask you one last question. Something else that I know is really important to you about kind of early career opportunities. One of the things I heard about from Obama when he spoke at South by Southwest recruiting for USDS and other services like it is that we need to move from the debate about governance from the political discussion of big government versus small government to good government. And in order to have good government, you have to have people who work at the government who are conscientious civil servants, and we need to have a pipeline of people who are familiar with tech, who are in there with that philosophy of good governance versus small, big. That's a political discussion. We need good governance. How does your what is your recruiting effort? What are you trying to do to get people in the door, and how does that relate to the concept of good governance?
Sure. Earlier on, related to this, you asked Andrea a question about how do agencies stay abreast of all the latest developments in technology. And my answer to that is the same answer to this question is you need to bring in that next generation of people who have experience with it. And, by hiring early career folks who are just coming out of these programs, who've been living with the AI systems and using them in their day-to-day lives and, have had an opportunity to experiment with them in the private sector and, have been in helping to innovate in academia, those types of folks earlier on in their careers, are an incredible asset. And we, the Office of Management and Budget publishes statistics about the federal government's workforce. And, TLDR, as of the 2018 numbers, citation needed, of course, roughly for every one employee under the age of 30, there are 7 over the age of 50 in the federal government. So we are going to be facing a retirement cliff. And we're not even talking about big or small. Like, the government is just going to continue. We need to just have people, right? And programs like the United States Digital Corps out of the GSA is helping to bring in 2-year tour of duty, 50% signing bonus, like guaranteed full-time job offer at the end of your experience as long as you meet the program requirements. And for young people who are facing one of the toughest job markets for technology, there have been over 400,000 layoffs in the tech sector in the last 4 years. So if you're coming fresh out of school, you're competing with senior people, and the jobs are not quite as there as they used to be. The amount of venture capital that's being invested is going down. So there just are not as many opportunities. So the government is in a wonderful position, and the public sector is in a wonderful position to provide these career development opportunities. And if at the end of your 2-year tour of duty, you decide the public sector isn't for you, you can go on and move from a junior SWE to a senior SWE or a regular SWE, and that'll make your job prospects all the better. You will have had time to learn things, pay your bills, get a couple years towards your public service loan forgiveness. I have no problem suggesting to young people in their career, or early career people, or people who are transitioning their career, to go forward and try these programs. And another highlight, just this week, there was a convening of AI tech talent at the White House in commemoration of the passage of M1624, which is an executive order that helps to improve the hiring eligibility for various roles and positions. 2210 specifically, there's over 90,000 of these roles, and making sure that people from non-traditional backgrounds like boot camps and work experience and hackers can get access to those roles is another huge example of how the government can help to support building out that capacity for the entire country.
Remy, I could talk to you for 4 hours, and I think it would actually be probably interesting for 4 hours, but time is running out. In the show notes, we will add, for our non-government listeners, the M1624, 2020-10, those, we will have links to those. We'll also have links to OMB, an acronym you used. And for the people who are our government listeners, we'll have a link to what the acronym TLDR means. So, Remy, you continue to be an amazing translator between the world of government and tech. And I think the fact that you have one phrase where you used all of those things, switching back and forth, is a testament to how good you are at your job. I really appreciate you being on. I stay on for a little bit with me and chat so we can get your video fully uploaded. Just want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred, and all of the folks in the open source community, like the attendees of Health Data Palooza. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for the folks who came before, and that's why we need to continue sharing and working together in the open.